Good evening, everybody. Before I launch into the presentation, can I just have a yes from everybody in the chat panel to confirm you can actually hear me? Yes. That's excellent. Once in a while we get technical. It's just best to find out now, isn't it? Okay, without further ado, tonight we're going to be talking about the production of a marginal cost statement. This is particularly popular at the professional level, but the principles apply to anybody who's working on management accounting. So let's launch in. Okay, often we have a scenario where we set a budget to produce a certain amount of goods, and in fact what's actually produced is different from the amount we plan to produce, and also the volume sold is a different figure again. And normally the way we deal with this is we produce a thing called a marginal cost statement. This measures the profit earned under marginal costing. And a quick refresher before we go too far. Remember the big difference between absorption costing and marginal costing. Under marginal costing, all of the fixed overheads are charged as a cost to the period in which they're incurred. Under absorption costing, some of the fixed overhead is carried forward into the next period as part of the cost of any unsold items. Now, what we're going to do tonight generally is perceived to be a difficult task. I always used to think it was really a very challenging task. One day I sat down and worked out a sort of a little step-by-step guide, and I discovered with the right approach, it's actually quite straightforward, but you have to be logical. You have to have a logical method. Don't miss any steps out. If you do everything the way I'm going to describe tonight, you should get these right every time. So first job, let's summarize what the steps are that we're going to take, and then we'll go through an example. The first thing, and anybody who watched our flexed budget statement the other week will remember this one because it's the same first step. Draw up a standard cost card based on the budget to show two things: budgeted variable costs per unit, budgeted fixed costs. Chances are you won't be asked to do this as part of an assignment or an assessment answer, but your workings will be so much easier if you just spend a couple of minutes doing this and you've got it there to refer to. Step number 2, using the cost card that you've produced, you flex the budget in line with the number of units sold. So if you intended to produce 1,000 and you sell 1,200, then flex up the budget to that new level. And note that it's the units sold. I've already mentioned we may well have a different amount of production to the actual amount sold, and it's the units sold that we're interested in. Step 3. Now I've made up a bit of terminology here. Draw up an actual cost card, and this is going to be based on the data that we're given about what really happens. We want the actual variable costs per unit. We want the actual fixed costs. Again, you won't be asked to provide this as part of your answer to a question, but you're far more likely to solve the question fairly smoothly and get it right if you do this. Step number 4, fairly predictable. Use the second cost card to recalculate the cost of the goods actually sold. So if your volume of production was 20,000 and you've spent £20,000, that's £1 a unit. If you've only sold 18,000, that's the cost we're interested in for this exercise. So once again, it's the units sold. So almost certainly the variable cost figures that you arrive at with this exercise will be less than the totals given in the data. If they're not, double check, because you may have got one of your calculations back to front. I've said this so many times over the years, fixed costs are not adjusted at all. Fixed costs remain fixed because they're fixed. The whole of the fixed cost, however much it is charged to the period, irrespective of how much of the output has been sold. Finally, step number 5, put the two sets of figures side by side, and then we can calculate variances. So now let's have a look at a typical example. Bardsley Limited produces a single product for which the selling price is currently £20 per unit, and that is the budgeted selling price that we're going to use to measure our variances against. They've been doing some research and they're all having the big meeting around the table, as we've all done. Somebody said if we could just drop the selling price a little bit, we think we can get a big increase in our market share. Maybe it's a product where there's a lot of competition. Small difference in the price can get a lot more sales. Furthermore, purchasing manager's been talking to the suppliers, and we've learned that if we can increase our offtake slightly on our materials, we can actually get a discount for buying a greater volume. So therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to knock 50p off the price for a month just to see what happens. But we're not going to reflect that in our budget. Original budgeted output was for 14,000 units. That's what we thought we were going to make and sell. For this month, we're going to step up the output by 10% to 15,400. And then in the event, what happens is we actually manage to sell 14,800. And now we just need a few numbers. I'm just going to put this table up. Bear with me a second. Now, here's our original budget on the left. 14,000 units at £20, you'll recall. 280,000. And we're given total figures. We're not given unit costs at this point. So what we're going to do now is we'll pop that cost original data card to one side, and then we can use that to do some calculations. So step one, we're going to draw up our standard cost card. First of all, we'll need to draw the template, put some headings down the side, the items. So first item, we've already said £20, we were given that, and we can prove it with 280,000 over 14,000. On to our variable costs. Our total cost of material is £84,000. This was our budgeted cost. We budgeted to make 14,000 units. That means we expect it to cost £6 a unit for material. Similarly, labour, 112 over 14, gives us £8 a unit. Variable overhead, 21 over 14, £1.50 a unit. Our budgeted fixed cost of labour was £12,000. That doesn't alter. Our budgeted other fixed overheads, 14,000. So there's our standard cost card, which we will be using now. And what we'll do now is we'll pop that in the corner to replace that first lot of data. And then we can move on to step number 2. Using the cost card, we can flex our budget. Remember that we're going to flex it to the quantity sold, not the total produced. And the fixed costs, keep saying it, stay the same because they're fixed. So once again, we need to draw a template, put in the headings, items down the side. For 14,800 units, at our normal selling price of £20, we would expect a revenue of £296,000. Material, we would expect to spend 88,800. Labour, we'd expect to spend 1,400, and so on down. The fixed costs do not change. Irrespective of output, they're supposed to be fixed. What we can now do is calculate what our operating profit should be at our original selling price if we sold this amount of volume. And that comes out at £40,600, which is simply the revenue figure minus all of those other costs. Quick poll, be honest, who wanted to flex the fixed costs? Come on. Do not flex fixed costs because they're fixed. Sounds obvious, but I've marked lots of assignments over the years where they They just do not stay fixed. Okay, now on to the next stage, and what we must now do is draw up our actual cost card. So we need the original data once again, which will pop into the corner. There it is. This time we're going to divide our actual total variable costs by the total produced, because the material that we've used, for example, hasn't gone into just the units we've sold. It's gone into all of these. We've now got to work out how much of the material used is actually going to go into our cost of sales. Fixed costs, yet again, just go in as given. So, once again, let's draw up a template. Headings at the top, headings down the side. Our selling price, well, we've been given that, but we'll double check. Sure enough, 1950 a unit, which is the figure that was being talked about when we decided to embark on this campaign. Material. The total usage is 83,160. That shouldn't be the actual cost card there. It should be that one. Can we just... So there we are, yes. So material 83,160. Sorry for any confusion there. Our labour 8160. £8. So the material 83,160 over 15,400, £5.40 reflects the fact that we've got a discount from our suppliers because of the increased volume. Our labour costs, that's a little bit more than the standard. Maybe we've had to work overtime to achieve the extra production, because you can't magic extra people out of thin air, much as we'd sometimes like to. Variable overhead 23,100 over 15,400. That's cost us as expected. And our fixed costs, which are given, in they go. Now, at this point, what we're now able to do, we're going to switch back now to our, we want to put that actual cost card now. We'll put that up into the corner. And there it is. That's the one we've just produced. What we can now do is work out how much of the costs incurred have gone into the products that we've sold. And it's 14,800 that we've sold, not 15,400. And I keep saying it, fixed costs stay the same. You probably get fed up of hearing that, but better to hear it now than read it in your feedback. So, once again, this time we're going to draw up a template, more or less the same layout yet again. This one we know because we were given it. Now, material 14,800 times an actual cost per unit of 540 means 79,920 has gone into the product we've sold. Labour 14,800 by 840, 124,320. The variable overhead 14,800 by 150, 22,200. And our fixed costs are written off entirely in the period. And now we can work out an actual profit on the 14,800 units sold, and that comes out at 33,660. So, nearly there. Now it's step number 5. What we're now able to do is we can put our flex budget into a table alongside the actual figures. We can calculate variances. So once again, we need our flexed budget that we drew up a while back. And there it is. And what we're going to do, draw another table. It's a different layout this time. It's fairly obvious what we're doing. Same items down the side. This time, first of all, we're going to put in the flexed budget, and it's just a matter of copying in the figures we've already worked out. So for this many sales, our revenue should be 296,000. Material, labour, variable overhead. These are just the figures that we've already worked out in the flexed budget. So we we said that that volume, our normal pricing structure, we'd expect to achieve 40,600. What we then do is we need to put the actual results into the corner there. And there they are. And once again, it's just a matter now of copying the figures in. 2886, 79,920, 124320, fixed costs, and our operating profit. So, last job of all now is what we can do is we can calculate our variance. Revenue variance, well, we know that's going to be less than expected. I think we all know that if revenue is less than it should be, that's an adverse variance. Material, we've got some good news there. 8880, saving on the normal budgeted cost for that amount of sales. So that's favourable. Labour has cost us extra, as we know. That's adverse. There's no variance on variable overhead. Fixed cost of labour, maybe we've had to put the cleaners on extra hours because of the extra shifts we've worked. Maybe a bit more supervision, things that normally don't change. They have on this occasion. That's adverse. Other fixed overheads, a bit more maintenance perhaps. And if we add together all of those variances, we find, or if we compare the operating profit, they should both agree. And that's adverse overall because our profit is less than expected. So now we've got one final step to take, which is if we what we'll do now, the table we've just drawn up, we'll pop that in the corner. And this is, again, this next step isn't something that you'll be required to do necessarily, but it's a very useful step to take just to give yourself some reassurance that you've got things right. What we do is we'll sum up all of those individual variances and see how they compare to the total variance. We've 7400 adverse, 8880 favourable, adverse, nothing, adverse, sum them all up, 6940, which is exactly the difference between the flex budget profit and the actual results. At which point it only remains for me to say, has anybody got any questions? Or is it really that straightforward? Alan will be keeping the chat panel running for a couple of minutes if anybody wants to fire any questions in. Is there anybody out there? I thought this chat panel had stopped working for a minute. Thank you, Tracy. That is the objective of the exercise. You're very kind. I think the truth is there are lots of techniques that we use and lots of quite tricky exercises to do in the world. And if you break them down into the right steps and remember the steps, a lot of things can be pretty straightforward. Good, thank you, Natalia. I think at this point I shall sign off and I shall say thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to the next.